Stumble forward, stumble forward. The 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 stumble.
I'd like to welcome Agam Darshi to The Stumble Forward. Agam is a British-Canadian producer, director, writer, screenwriter, playwright, artist, and graphic designer. She has appeared in over 25 television productions and more than 11 films. In 2021, she wrote, directed, and starred in Donkey Head, which was shot in Regina and released in 2022. I'm honored and excited to have her here to chat today. Please welcome Agam Darshi. Hello.
Hi.
How was
nice
that?
to be here.
Right?
Thanks for having me. That was good. Yeah, I haven't done graphic design in a long time, but yeah, I still use Photoshop.
Somebody snuck it into your wiki, so you can claim it.
I like it. I'm doing it. It's mine.
You know what? I could see myself being offended if one of my myriad sort of side hustles wasn't sort of kept in my bio. Like, hey, but they forgot that time. That time that I colored that picture and called myself a graphic designer.
No, I actually was a graphic designer in a former life. Before I became an actor, I worked for a company and I would make websites for them. But, technology has changed so much that I was actually tinkering with Squarespace the other day. And I'm like, how does this work? Like, I've just completely, yeah. But
well, let's start there because I know you started in art school. Is that right? Like you were in Cal.
Yeah.
You were born in the UK. Let's start right from the very beginning, and we'll get kind of that basis stuff out of the way because it's interesting. So you started in the UK. When did your family move to Canada?
When I was 3, we moved to Montreal. I was 3, and then after that, like a few years later, we moved to Ottawa. We moved around there a whole bunch, and then we ended up moving to Calgary. Yep. That's where I went to high school and university.
Yep.
And then I graduated university, and I spent like a short stint in like San Jose, California, because my parents worked there. And then I was like, I need to get out of here. So then I ended up moving back to Canada, and I lived in Vancouver for a big chunk of my life, and then started coming back and forth between LA. And now I live in LA.
Yeah, I seem to recall, thanks to social media, we were all sort of apprised of one another's lives in ways that we weren't used to only 10 or 20 years ago. So I knew that you had been living in Vancouver, and then I knew that you'd uprooted and gone to Los Angeles. Does an actor, does somebody in the film business have to end up in LA? Or, I feel like Vancouver is a pretty burgeoning film city. So what precipitated the move for you then?
Yeah, it is. It's a great city to work in. Vancouver is. Canada's a great country as an artist and as an actor. It's a great country. But I think I did sort of feel like there was this ceiling, and I wasn't quite sure what was beyond that ceiling, but I was like, well, let's give this a shot. Let's move to LA because that's sort of what you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
And so came here and didn't love the city, but my husband loves it. He's also an actor. And I think for him, he just really sort of, the weather's so great. And he just felt like this was the place for him. So I was like, okay, let's do this. I think also I just have I don't have a very strong sense of home in terms of brick and mortar. For me, home is people. It's not necessarily because I've moved around so much. So I can't really say I feel very Canadian, but I can't say Vancouver's my home or Calgary's my home or I'm British. It's not really. I kind of I'm here now. I probably won't be here forever.
Let's talk a little bit. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about how there's this feeling like there's a limited opportunity in Canada because I don't know whether it's just my age and that. In my own particular career, feeling like I hit a plateau, and then you start to look around for opportunities to shake away from that plateau, to feel reinvigorated, to possibly sort of re-inject more business momentum back into the career. Definitely where I sit, it does feel like there's shorter runway here in Canada. It's great that your fella loves LA. I love LA too, but it is a place that can have quite a divisive effect. So, okay, I know there's no real question there, but yes, Canada feels like there's limited runway. LA feels like obviously they create entertainment for the entire world. Why move now? And why did it take this long, I guess, to get there? And I ask in some ways because I'm wondering why I didn't do the same and why I'm not there now.
Yeah. So when I started acting, I sort of fell into acting in a way, right? And I had momentum, and I started, I was on, I think, a couple of shows as a series regular in Canada on the same year. And it was just like, it was going super well. But I think the Canada doesn't have a star system, especially within like the film industry.
Yeah.
Which is good and bad, right? Because you do it because you love the craft of it. And that's a beautiful thing. You don't necessarily do it to get famous. But then what happens is that you end up like finishing a show where you were, you've worked your way up, and then you start from scratch again. And then you're like given principal auditions where you have like 3 lines, and you're like, wait a minute, I was just, doing something else. And so I think there was this desire for me to be like, okay, I'm not going to progress here. This is it. This is how it's going to be. So let's move somewhere else where it feels like there's, like you said, like a bigger runway. And so I started going back and forth like 12 years ago. And the thing about LA is that it's so humbling, like it's just like very quickly was like, well, you might have done stuff in Canada, but you're this is a different landscape, and there's a lot of other people here. And so it's taken me a long time to sort of, I've come to realize, like, it's made me dig deep. It's made me want to quit acting a million times and quit this industry, but it's also made me really kind of come to terms as to what kind of artist am I? Why am I actually doing this? And who am I doing it for? And what is it that I'm doing? What is it that I want? Because I really drank the Kool-Aid fast in terms of like, when I first started out, I wanted to be an artist. I didn't necessarily want to be like on TV or do any of that kind of stuff. I thought moonlighting as a theater artist would be perfectly like a great thing to do. And then I got into TV and film, and I got an agent, and they were like, well, now you need to, book the show that's going to get your name on the map. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I need to do. And I was like, that's it. And now I realize, I'm like, no, that might be in the cards, maybe not. But I think it's my focus is something different. And I've also come to realize that after writing and directing Donkey Head and acting in it, I was able I feel very blessed that I was able to do this. I got the money from Telefilm, which it was a Canadian film. I made it there, but I distributed it in the States, and that kind of opened up other doors for me that I didn't expect. And so I think moving forward, it seems like, just from a business perspective, if you're able to balance both somehow and really kind of utilize the audience that's here in this big country of America, then that can be really helpful. I answered. I don't know. I was kind of all over the place.
No. I feel like you are speaking to exactly the feelings I have about that duality. Even what you said, there is a large audience there. They're a different kind of people than Canadians. I find, even as fans, like, Americans are great fans. At least that's what I can kind of gather from watching on the sidelines, that they really buy into things, So let's talk about Donkey Head, because I'm watching it and I'm thinking a lot of thoughts. One big one is how difficult this must be to be in front of the camera and, in theory, behind the camera as well. How did this start? What's the writing process like? How many years to get to this place? Like, writing a pop song, which is, what I do, that's a 3.5 minute thing. Like, you can knock them out in 20 minutes. Like, you can see the fundamentals of, the construction of a pop song, like, starts to kind of shine through. Like, is this thing going to work or not? Like, it's a very fast process. Film, I feel like you must travel a multi-year road to end up eventually with your editor to see if you actually got a movie made. Like, it just feels circuitous, dangerous, troublesome, cumbersome, kind of awful, but also to achieve what you achieved, also amazing. So am I crazy for thinking that it's a lot of that stuff, or is it just purely wonderful? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's all of it. It's I started writing it. It's so embarrassing. Like it took me like 10 years to finish writing the thing. Um, and it was because I would put it on hold and then I started up again. And in the process, I had babies and, so it was just a lot of life that was happening. And I think I started it because, like I think the thing about being an actor in this industry is that you belong to someone else's project, and so you're very much sort of in the constraints of how they see you. And
Mm.
doing this for as long as I have, I think I was as a woman of color, like there was really like there are certain constraints that people like ways that people see you,
Mm.
and possibly even particularly in Canada, I really felt that. And so I was like, I wanted to write something where, first of all, I was the number one on the call sheet.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to see if I could do it. And yeah. And so I started writing this thing, and over time, it started taking a life of its own, and it became a lot more personal as I started to dig deeper, as I started to find my voice more as a writer. It went to the screenwriters lab at Whistler Film Festival, which was really helpful, just to actually work with mentors and people to be able to, it's amazing when you get a mentor and they're so invested in what you are making. And then from there it progressed really quickly. Got producers, got money. I decided that I would direct it, and then it just sort of went from there. But it was I don't know if you ever find this when you're making an album, but sometimes you get to a point where it almost like starts to create itself. Like it's almost like you have to prove that you to the universe or whatever, that you're committed to it. And then once that starts to happen, then it's just like the things start to come your way, and it's like, yes, we'll give you some money for this. We'll get the right, like the team comes together. It's really kind of fascinating, beautiful, magical process, and humbling, right? Because you realize maybe I'm not as in control as I thought I was.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's the thing from being, a solo singer person to watch film and I've been involved in lots of, filmic outlets through shooting videos and being on TV and even doing a little bit of film and theater. Like I kind of understand that process. But yes, I mean, I'm always impressed by the fact that it has to harmonize a lot of people and a lot of egos and a lot of wishes, thoughts, and feelings for that project. That in and of itself, it I hate to say it, but in some ways, when I see bad theater or see, or we shouldn't say bad. Let's say when I see something that doesn't agree with me, I think I can't help but think, well, I mean, it's very, very difficult to harmonize all of those events, all of those people to create something that's succinct in the end. Again, coming from a universe where I have to come up with something that's 3.5 minutes long in the end. Like it's such a Sisyphean thing, I would imagine, to push that rock up the hill every day.
But
Um,
I think it's not even harmonizing it. I think that's actually the danger, is to try to harmonize it, right? It's like, because I don't think art should be a democracy. You have to have
yeah,
someone with a vision,
I love
right? And
this.
you have to like bring
Yep.
them together and inspire them, and kind of, but at the same time be open to, if they have a different way of seeing through something. And I think it's really kind of cultivating that inner sort of compass to know it's like, that's not working, or this is working, or let's try this, But I don't know if it's not a democracy. It's not trying to create harmony necessarily. At least
Mm.
that's not the way I see it.
I love hearing that. I really do, because I'm with you. That's an old Zappa quote for me that I feel like I've always sort of quietly tucked away. I mean, I think, we're living in a time politically, socially, where I think there's this expectation that niceness sort of goes ahead of us all in the creation process. You and I may have come from another generation where, we may have other feelings about niceness. I know I do. Quick channel change a little bit within the context of this creation process, because there's a quote I read that's the quote I've been kind of bandying about. I don't know whether you heard it somewhere or this is sort of this has come from your language, but the "I believe that specificity creates universality" quote. Watching the movie, it is deeply specific I'm only guessing it must be deeply personal, and we can get to that. But let's just talk about that quote, because again, and not to keep bringing back to me, but from my vantage point, I think there's some people in the songwriting field that would say, keep things fairly neutral and in hopes of sort of being able to appeal to as many people as possible, which let's call that an untested theory. And then I saw Colin Quinn, pardon me, who's an American comedic actor, talk about writing a show with specificity being the goal, specificity being the thing that is in fact ultimately universal. It blew my mind when I heard it, and then all of a sudden I'm writing very differently. Like
really, you find that you're writing differently after hearing that. That's so interesting.
I wrote a song called Battlefords, which is a really new song, and it's deeply specific. Like it goes in and it itemizes things. And it was in some ways built on the heels of this idea that you want to paint a picture that is so vivid to you. And by doing that, it becomes vivid to others as well. I feel like Donkey Head is that. I feel like it's a vivid picture, almost uncomfortable at times because of how it cuts right to who you are, because you have painted with such technicolor a life picture that can relate to more people because it is so specific. That's my feeling. Am I onto something here with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's something that actually makes me squirm when I hear about neutrality. I don't like that word, and I don't like the idea that we keep things sort of neutral unless it's done in a way that is specific to that world. You know, I think I feel like I'm somewhat of not a young writer, but I feel like I'm still sort of like testing things. But I feel like even if it's not my own personal experience, to still know the specificities within the character and the world that you're creating is really important and helpful. And I think also a huge part of the work that I want to do and that I do is to create more work for diverse voices. And I think the only way that can, I think a part of that is that when you make it so specific, everyone, regardless of their background, will be able to watch it and connect and relate to it. And so I think it's important to make it so specific. And I mean, as an actor, that's like acting 101.
Yeah, right.
Like specify, right?
Yeah, that does all make sense. It's true. I can even tell that we're rebuilding Three Penny Opera at the moment, and I had a director here kind of helping me sing through it. And it is nice to be guided emotionally, to be given parameters, and the more specific, the better, because the more you can visualize the clarity of that picture of what it is you're trying to achieve, the easier it is to get there. I've heard you talk about that clarity of image, or clarity of that you're. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about did I have a dream? Did I have a clear vision for the goal that I was shooting for? Or was I just somebody with some ability and talent and sort of bounced around from one sort of opportunity that fell in my general direction after another? And maybe this is kind of what I'm getting at, why I'm so impressed that you would move to LA. I know you're younger than I, but there's something about being in the entertainment business after your 20s where it does feel like, oh wow, have I aged out of this? And to be courageous, and also maybe too, watching you play the part of Mona, it's a rich part. It's not necessarily, you're not even necessarily fully likable, although we're there for you through the film. I'm not really getting at anything other than, okay, you write this part. How am I allowed to ask you how close this is to your sort of familial reality?
Yeah. I mean, there's parts that are close to people that I know. My mom has, and she's one of four. My dad, I lived with him when he was going through chemo. I lived with him and my mom while he was going through chemo, and he survived it, thank God. But it's an ugly disease, and I was curious about this idea of the people who take care of those who are ultimately dying, right?
Yeah.
I was curious about that. I've always loved characters that feel really flawed and kind of ugly, and I've always loved, yeah. So there's things that are very familiar to me. I'm not really Mona. I mean, at least not outwardly. I think, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's familiar, but not like it's not me. It's not my life.
Because when I'm watching it, of course, I feel like it might be just my weakness as an artist, but I find it hard to write about things that I don't have any sort of personal relationship to. So when I'm watching the film, I'm thinking, man, this is a lot. If this is a personal picture of your family story, it's a lot to put out in the world. Even as I've thought about how much of my own childhood, like when could I start to talk about things that would maybe be slightly less comfortable for my family? When is the right time as an artist to kind of truck something like that out into the world? Are
Do
these
you
things
do that though with your music? Like metaphorically, do you do it?
like sing about things that would be risky for my family to hear, you mean?
Yeah, but yeah.
I did when I was younger. I
Mhm.
think that in my very, very, very earliest days of songwriting, when I was a teenager, living at home, feeling rebellious and probably like a bit of a jerk, I threw stuff in my parents' face as sort of a matter of course. And I probably regret it now. I think of a few of those songs I wrote almost intending to hurt my parents. Um, but I was also, raised in the 90s where I feel like uh, the idea of personal victimhood was sort of minted in the 90s. I feel like through afternoon television, it sort of disseminated this idea that by investing in everybody's own personal trauma, that we can all find sort of the virtues in our own victimhoods, which I think I bought into as a kid that came from the 90s, and then have sort of been trying to backpedal heavily out of that, realizing that there's not much value in that once you've sort of played out the smallness of it.
Mm.
So, yeah, I guess when I have thought about honoring my family differently than how I maybe didn't honor them when I also am not a parent. I am having to work with younger people these days. I'm starting to feel my age. I'm starting to feel the divisions of like the generational gap. I'm starting to be the old man in discussions. So I move a little bit more carefully through my interactions with everybody because um there's new tender parts to the way we communicate, and I want to be cognizant of how I invest in all of those, which is also to say that I feel like I'm not out to hurt the feelings of my family,
Mhm.
just be, but I think that was probably just a very rebellious teenage thing to do. And it's easy reach for sort of guttural reaction. So I guess, sorry, it's
Yeah.
a long answer to your
No,
question. I
no,
appreciate you asking.
no. I mean, I think about that as well. Just how do you start writing from a place that's not necessarily your own personal experience or even the experiences of people around you, because I'm such a voyeur. But I think it's all still there. It's all still the same stuff. It's just sort of like shrouded with different costumes, and put into different like scenarios. There's this genre piece that I'm writing. It's kind of post-apocalyptic. That's, obviously has nothing to do with my own personal life, but it's interesting to me, and I think there's still things that can like when I write from a place of like a feeling. Like I feel exactly that thing that I want to bottle up and like put out there. And so that still transfers from me to whatever the project is. It's just it looks a lot different.
Can we probably will come back and talk a little bit more about this movie that you've made that's yours. But I'm also interested in your work as an actor, um, because you said something that made me. And now that I work around actors, mostly theater actors, because I'm mostly sort of doing work for theater, but I didn't realize everything that's required from an actor. It feels like there's a craft aspect to acting, much in the same way as I believe there's a craft aspect to songwriting. And then there's the artistic side. And I think I'm guessing for an actor, when you're crossing from one realm to the other, or you're marrying those two realms with some sort of intimacy that makes sense. But have I got this right? Like as actors, you're offering a service. Some days you're just standing there for lighting. Some days you're just kind of you're standing on your marks in order that cameras get set up, and then other times you're called to emote, to cry on command, and all this other stuff. Like, it feels at one time it's very much a craft and a service, and then at another time you kind of have to inject art into it at a very deep level. How is that? How it works? Am I seeing that right? Have I got an assessment of this that feels good to you?
I mean, I don't necessarily see it that way. I think it's really interesting, actually. I think different projects require different things from actors. I think actors want every moment to feel like art, but not every moment is. But I think at the same time, that's always the aim for the actor. It's really interesting, actually. When I've also started to direct, and I direct TV sometimes. And, sometimes you're directing like a procedural, a cop procedural, for example. And so much of that is the pacing. It has to be fast. It has to, you just have to go from one plot point to the next plot point. But obviously the actors, they want to do a great job, and they desire to, to really feel the moment, to be in the moment. And that's wonderful. But on the other side of the camera, you're just like, yeah, but I'm going to edit out of this, where we're going to go straight to the next thing. So we just need to like pace it up, which I think every actor hates that direction, is to pace it up, but you have to pace it up. Whereas when you're doing a film, and not every film, but when you're doing a film, or when you're doing, like, let's say a really like character-y, like TV show on HBO or something like that, then you might have a little bit more time to just sort of like spread things out and to really feel into the character and stuff. And so I think it partly is dependent on what it is that you're selling, on what it is that you're a part of, and just sort of knowing the difference. Like, knowing that this is for mass consumption. It's fast. It's a procedural TV for a network show, versus like, this is an art film that's probably gonna, play at a small little theater. I think it's partly that, and I think also, I think Meryl Streep actually said once that sometimes the hardest things to do as an actor is to say pass the salt, versus like really emoting and getting like into the heavy, like deep bits of a scene. Oh. Because that's the stuff that we live for and that we know. But it's just to say like pass the salt is so in the most like casual, honest way is actually really, really tricky. So I think there is art to that too.
I 100% agree. I feel like, having been involved in a few theater productions for the last few years, you start to see how the really great actors, when they say pass the salt, like, you believe it. And
you believe it.
I've seen that, and I feel like, wow, it's these moments of beige interstitial, just the human moments, and not the soliloquy or the big emotional breakdown, or it is past the salt. That's very fascinating. Very, very fascinating.
And it's also a little bit sad for actors, I think, because we always think that, the real, the breakdowns, that's what we live for. And we try to make, especially when we're younger, I think. And even when we're older, I know I do this. Like, I think all actors just try to make every moment just like into something more, because that's what we live for, right? but
Mm-hmm.
it's not always like that. It's like life is in between the moments. It's in between the lines.
Amen. I mean, I feel like I've been saying that in interviews since day one. It's
Mm.
what impresses me most. It's the thing that I feel like I am most excited to write about. And I think the thing that ultimately captures the human condition
The
is
banal moments.
banal. Yeah, the unseen and the banal. It gets me the most excited when we feel like we're not being watched.
Yeah, I love that.
When we say
I
past the
love
script,
that.
nobody's watching us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I think those little private moments, but that's when we're our weirdest as well, I think, like that's also kind of where we're our most honest, but we're also we're such strange like creatures, right? And
Yeah.
so it's yeah, who are we when nobody's really watching, when we're just washing the dishes, or when we're yeah.
There's a lot of that patience, especially in the first half of Donkey Head, where we watch Mona at that distance. We can tell you're maybe a little untethered, but I found the first half of the film is patient in that way. We get to watch more than we're putting control of our own eyes and ears to make our own assessment of what's happening. It feels like there's a lot of space for us to inject what it is we're feeling, and that's kind of good because I think there's a lot in the era of content. We are force fed the concepts, force fed the narratives, and again, having come mostly from the 20th century, I still have an appetite for things that move at a pace that allows me to invest my own observations, my own intimate wants into that. And I sometimes feel offended if I'm not allowed my own ability to create as a watcher. I was talking to Jane Siberry, who she talked about as a singer songwriter on stage, she's careful to not over emote in order to leave space for the audience to have their field to emote in. Do you know what I
Mm.
mean? Instead of moving
Hmm.
into their space and taking up space, it's about sort of as the performer performing that music, you have to be performative emotionally, but you can't overstep into the realm of where the audience lives and wants to have their full space to feel and emote and experience that piece. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, it really does. I think also I'm kind of from the same era as you, right? So I think there is sort of this um I mean, is it voyeurism? I don't know. Like it's just kind of nice to watch somebody do something as opposed to really kind of push the audience into this is how you're supposed to feel about it. Um which I think you do more when you're directing for TV than you do for film. So I think there's also like a little bit of a divide there. But yeah, I find that interesting, and those are the films that I like the most, and those are it's kind of it feels like it's dying a little bit, right? Because we are like our brains are getting hijacked more and
Yeah.
more.
How
Yeah.
are you dealing with that with your kids, out of curiosity?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think story is huge in our family, like, and it always has been. So, in terms of like reading stories to them and watching movies, we're big into that. But iPads and like those little 20-second Insta whatever, we really try. My husband and I, we do have our phones with us, and yeah, we are like a lot of people probably where we're like we have our phones and we're navigating that, but we really try not to let them use devices. I think that's a different kind of thing, and I think especially for little boys, I don't know why I feel that way, but I think boys in particular, uh, they just have they just really love their video games, and their brains just sort of like are attracted to that. So
Mm.
we try not to like they don't have video games in this house, and
Yeah.
if we want to go to an arcade, we'll go to an arcade as
Yeah,
opposed to
that makes
actually bringing it into the home. Yeah, it's kind of scary, right? Because this it's scary for me. Like I wonder sometimes when I'm flicking through my phone, I'm just like,
yeah.
what am I doing? It's been half an hour. So
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I find myself sounding again like I'm the old man and shouting, "Get off my lawn!" But there, I, I feel like I was maybe a better person, or was a lot. I was certainly, there was less stumbling without the internet. I feel like on the
What
internet,
do you mean?
I feel like there are those days where, man, like, you know, you'll get your telephone on Sunday will say that your screen time is up 60% and you have been spending a total of 5 hours a day. And it's like, I wasn't even aware of that. And all of a sudden, just when, as a middle-aged person, I'm starting to feel like, man, I really need to make a meal out of every day, every moment. I need to be investing, and I need to really be living in that moment. I really need to be in the here and now. And then your phone tells you, hey, 5 hours a day, you're not in the here and now. And it's depressing, and it's revealing that even though I think I'm this sort of tough, Gen Xer who can stiff upper lip it through whatever needs to be kind of accomplished, it's like, man, it's revealed very quickly that I'm every bit as weak and without my own resilience as anybody would be. And that needs to be kept in check. And, ultimately, as being artists, I feel like if I'm not creating more than I'm taking in, then I'm not sure I get to call myself an artist. So I definitely feel like I'm cognizant of the input output.
That's really high standards, but I like that. I think that's important, to be that strict with yourself. But yeah, those are really high standards. I remember as a kid, just my leisure time was getting on my bike and like just going to the park, and just like writing bad poetry as you watch the trees, just like just really taking in your surroundings and feeling like very wistful and melancholic. And I wonder, like, we barely have those kinds of moments anymore where you can really just like sit and observe a thing. And it's very sad that we don't really have that. But yeah, I like that you have to create more than you take in. I've thought many times about just completely deleting it, but I tried that once. I tried it for an entire year where I just like deactivated my accounts, and it was a fantastic year, but then I wasn't invited to anything. Nobody knew what I was doing. And then I was like, I'm not really that important or relevant. So what do you do? What do you do? And does it matter? Like, does it really matter? I don't know.
I feel like I did the same thing. I went off Twitter for a year and then felt like, man, when you're not on the internet, and there's no such thing as newspapers anymore, and there's no such thing as magazines, and I'm not on TV because there's no videos, all the ways that I used to be able to reach into people's lives are mostly all gone. So the internet is it. It's the last, it's got the monopoly on outlet. And I, like you, kind of plug back in, but it was a blissful time away. And it's the smallest things, whether it's like human ugliness that makes your stomach turn, or whether, and I'm sad and embarrassed to admit, or it could be somebody, one of my music cohorts who you see, oh man, they won a thing or had a major success. And then your initial response is this ugly jealousy or ugly, like, and it was just like, everything about this fucking thing makes me a less good person when I'm invested in it. But, by virtue of wanting to do business in the 21st century, it's almost impossible to not. It's a real catch-22. The paradox is real.
Yeah, I've thought many times about hiring somebody else to do it for me, but
right.
I don't know. I'm like, what would you do? I don't even know what I'm doing half the time.
Yeah. We can all smell through those accounts that are written by others. Ultimately, that's been one of the amazing things about the internet. You'd think that it would. I still think humans are finding authenticity easily. You know what I mean? I still think I still think that the stuff that blows up and goes viral, it's usually because there's something authentic going on. I feel like there's lots of situations where as humans we're tricked into eating lousy food. We're tricked into all kinds of things. Like advertising really does have us. But there's other things when the internet reveals that our humanness is still very intact, and a song or a little video or these things that can come from a real place of human authenticity can still reach through all the horse shit and connect. I'm still blown away when that happens, and it reinvigorates my sense that all is not lost.
What do you think of AI?
I'm nervous of AI. Thank you for asking. I feel like I've been talking about AI for 5 or 6 years, saying it's Look, I don't fear anymore. I did a spiritual rebuild over the last year. Fear is a sin. It's not really something I need to invest in. But if I am to pick from the pantheon of fears that are being peddled by, you know, the mainstream, I would say AI is the one that I think has the biggest potential to be destructive. Which is not to say that I'm not using it, because I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use it in a few different sort of small capacities. Um, Technically, in the studio, there are things that AI covers that somebody with an educated ear would have used to. When I'm writing lyrics, I have a rhyme zone page open, and I have ChatGPT open. Sometimes it's like I need 4 syllables. I need a 4-syllable word that suggests a feeling like, and it's funny. It's not. It doesn't give me the direct answer, but it's enough to jog me out of my convention and make me think a little bit differently. So I'm not afraid of it, and I'm loath to be the Luddite that I'm naturally predisposed to be. I'm somebody who is fundamentally suspicious of the future, but it's that none of that has got me none of that has helped my career or really helped me as a person, I don't think, to. So I interact with it and I try to use it, and then I try to still maintain my humanity through all that. Why? What do you think about AI?
I don't know. I mean, there was a lot of strikes last year
Yeah.
from writers and actors who, and I know people who are very afraid of it. I saw somewhere that there were some AI models on Instagram making millions of dollars, and
Yeah.
and then so that kind of actually makes me feel good, because I'm like, well, I wonder if the standards of beauty now are going to change, because, you know, we're going to see each other, we're going to see flaws, and we're going to see wrinkles and big noses, and we're going to be like, oh, aren't you beautiful, as opposed to the things that we see on Instagram that are so perfect. Maybe, I don't know. And then I also wonder, I'm like, as an actor, like, what if something takes over?
Mm.
And I'm like, well, I guess we'd go back to theater. I don't know why I'm not worried about it.
Yeah.
I think it's because I just don't understand how a computer can make up a human experience. Because reality, honestly, is stranger than fiction. Like, there are things that happen in the real world that you're
Yep.
just like, I cannot believe that happened. That was just
Yep.
so bizarre and so weird. And those are like the juiciest things. So I just don't understand how that can actually be turned into. I don't know. I don't know how AI or a robot can, or a computer can hijack those very human, weird experiences. I wonder if it'll just force us to be more authentic, like you said, right? Maybe,
It's a great
I
thought.
don't know.
It's a great thought. And to be honest with you, I feel like I've never plugged in that response to my knee-jerk feeling of fear from AI, that like, oh, actually, this might allow for more of my weirdness or more of the depth of my artfulness, because it'll be the thing that humans ultimately want when when there's so much sort of fake perfection. I've never really thought of it like that, and it's an encouraging feeling to consider, honestly. Um, was AI the crux fundamentally of the strikes between the writers and actors? Was this the thing that was being telegraphed as, we need to get ahead of this before it gets ahead of us?
That was a huge part of it,
Yeah.
especially I think for both. I mean, I think it also had to just do with the studio system and how unfair things are, and just wanting to create an even level playing field with streaming. Things have changed so much, but yeah, AI was definitely a big part of it, for sure.
How does the business work? Like, what does a week look like in your life? Are you auditioning? Like, what does being an actor, writer, being you in LA, what does that look like?
I mean, it's so different week from week, right? It's yeah, there's lots of auditions right now. I'm not auditioning because I'm waiting to find out if the next season. I'm on a series called Sight and Scene. I'm
Mm-hmm.
waiting to see if it's coming back. And I kind of just wanted to give myself some time to write. So my days basically consist of like writing a lot, and then just sort of juggling that with, like, you know, just time to go to yoga and be in my family, like, be at home, because I traveled a lot last year for work. So yeah, it just sort of depends. It's so funny because this week in particular, we're doing this thing called the TCAs, which is the Television Critics Association, which is this big panel for the show, and all these different shows go to it. I don't really understand the point of it. Like, I think it's just kind of like an advertising thing, but like big celebrities, I guess, go. And so right after this, I'm going. So stupid. I'm going to the showroom to like look for something to wear that I can rent, because it's and that's also a part of the industry that I had long conversations with my manager about, like about maybe renting something as opposed to just using something that I already had. Like, just the image of things is such a funny, that's another dynamic I think that I personally have a harder time with in this industry. The art stuff's almost like, that's kind of easier, right? But then having to sort of brand yourself and sell yourself and like imagine what other people, like, what are you putting out there and how are they going to see you? And what do you wear to these things is something entirely different. And I'm not 100% behind it. Like, I'm suspicious of it, but I'm doing it.
Does living in LA as a Canadian actor, like, does your stock go up in Canada because
Yes. Yeah.
How strange. I mean, I remember when I got a write-up in Mojo magazine in the UK, I had a song immediately added to radio based on the approval of a publication from another country. What is that?
What is that? I don't know. It's really frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, it's great for you. Even if you were just to move to LA as a career gag to go, look, I live here now, and my price goes up or whatever, that I can get behind all that. But why can't we as a culture why can't we find our own confidence to make our own decisions and trust our eyes and ears on things? Why are we always second guessing? Why are we relying on the thoughts and feelings of other cultures so we can kind of come in second in our own race? It's so odd. What do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I do you? What do you think? Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I mean, I was just in England around Christmas, and there was a couple of moments in London, and I always get this in England, where the feeling of division in the social classes is really, it's really felt, it's very visible, it's very tangible in the UK. And I remember we had got in a situation where we were in a park walking, the sun was setting, and then we got locked in the park, and there was simply no movability. It was like, you're going to have to go in reverse and retrace your steps to leave this park. We simply won't open the door for you. And I thought, it's so funny because in Canada, there are touchstones of freedom that I think are actually more American, that we just expect things to operate, and we are not as cognizant or not as connected to some of the realities of that splay of social classes like it is in England. And so I guess through that lens, I wonder about the Canadian want to be nice as opposed to assertive, or to be seen as being, I mean, I even sort of feel there's a people-pleasing element, I think, in Canada, whereas there is no people-pleasing element in America. And it's all these things that add up to your being able to affirm your wants and desires in an absolute way. And I don't know if Canada has a bead on that. I feel like we put niceness and the want to not be American ahead of whatever it is we actually are. We're a culture that does tend to define ourselves by what we aren't. And I'm not sure that's an artful or creative position. And I'm just babbling. This isn't like I've really thought or crystallized this, and I'm giving you my well thought, but this is where my gut feels today anyways on this.
I feel like in America, it is so hard to survive.
Yeah.
It's just, they just don't have, they don't have healthcare. Everything's expensive, and going to university is like pretty hard, and paying for it. And so it's just really like a hustle to like survive and a hustle to thrive. And so there's no embarrassment about having to toot your own horn and to say, hey, I'm the best at this. And Americans are so good at that.
Yeah.
Like I find myself embarrassed as a Canadian to like say, you know, I'm I'm pretty good at this. But Americans are like, they're just like, yeah, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing next. And it's like, there's no shame in it. It's really fascinating. Whereas I think in Canada, because we're taken care of, you know, like our basic needs are taken care of, which is a beautiful thing. And we have governments that will give us money to make a thing. I mean, it's still competitive, but we have the resources there somewhat. Yeah. I think the problem, though, and it's a bit controversial, and I haven't really thought about it either, so I'm just sort of like, but I think the problem sometimes is that as a result, you know, because of the niceties, I've definitely been in, you know, gone to a play, you know, or seen a movie where everybody's like, that was great, that was fantastic. And it was like, it was not good. It was not good. But we're just like, we're ready to applaud and we're ready to stand up and say like, great job, that was fantastic. Because we are nice and because we want to create like, you know, a safe community for people. And I don't think that's a bad thing. But I think when it comes to just really sort of competing at a level that like, you know, countries where it's just sort of like it's all or nothing, like I have to be the best of the best to get that scholarship or to do that thing. It's just, there is no competition.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I do too. I do too. There is a lot of support in the arts in Canada to the point where sometimes we're almost feel owed that support. And does it cut into some of our resilience, some of our want? Like you say, you know, in America, there's no soft place to land. In the UK, there's no soft place to land. And when I think of like who makes the best rock and roll music, I mean, those are the two countries that do it best. And in Canada, you're right, there is a soft place to land. There's so much to consider. I think about this stuff all the time because I am interested in the artistic spirit of people in this country. I've been the recipient and been a grateful recipient of public money, and it's helped my career immeasurably. But there definitely does feel like the zero-sum game that's being played in the US means that the cream has to rise to the top or die, as opposed to just everything becoming possibly middling for the opportunity just to make it. Like you said, this is the kind of stuff that can be awfully controversial. And I certainly don't want to weigh in a judgmental way, but you've just moved to the US. I've been wondering if I should or why I haven't already. I think about when I was sort of in my Big in France days, and I remember there being this sort of sheepish phone call from my French record label who said, you know, Workman, we would have loved to put money behind your record, but we just got a call from Universal US and, you know, we have to prioritize the Mariah Carey record and sorry, you know, we can't help you. And then it hit me like, wow, like when America presses the go button, the whole world listens. And
oh my gosh, yeah.
And I even feel like the way that, you know, when my Canadian record reps would call around the US, they were sort of, it was all, they always thought it was quite quaint and cute. Like, oh, we heard from your little Canadian people that they decided to give us a call. And just because that American machine has forced a muscularity into the way people do business, it's like,
it's kind of ugly, right? Like it's kind of ugly, but at the same time, it's
kind of wonderful.
It's kind of, yeah, especially if you have it working for you. I've always been told though, like if you don't ever get rid of your Canadian agents, because they will be there for you to the end. Whereas like you just don't know. You don't know if your agents or your reps in America will actually like at a certain point, you're you know, it's business, and so they'll get rid of you whenever they want to. But yeah, it's a really interesting thing. I actually saw that just like, with Donkey Head and with distributing it, when they say we want something, when America says we want deliverables by tomorrow, they mean yesterday. Like when they say jump, you say how high. Like you just have to, like, it's so intense here in terms of just sort of the level of like how fast you have to go, how much you have to push.
Yeah.
Whereas in Canada, it's almost like you're sort of you're shamed a little bit if you push too hard. Yeah. If you show sort of like that level of, whether you want to call it ego or desire, like you kind of have to play it cool a little bit. Like, I don't really want it this badly.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like in some ways it's what has forbid the Canadian art spirit to manifest a stronger reality, because it never seeks to vocalize its goal. And that's what, through my big sort of spiritual rebuild in the last year and a half, I feel like, as I was just a very talented young kid who thought just by virtue of being talented that things were going to come my way, and they did. But what I never had was a dream or a goal that I sat awake at night and like dreamed into. And I know now, through what we've learned through sort of the emerging esoteric religious realities, like manifesting is real, having a goal is real, vocalizing that goal is real. These people who have great success, they all did the same thing. They visualized that goal and they went for it. And I feel like in Canada, writ large, as Canadians, we're all mostly forbidden to vocalize our goals or vocalize our dreams, for fear of sort of stepping on the toes of what it is to be a humble Canadian, which, that feigned humility has always been a little hard for me. Like, I'm like, like, just because we say we're humble doesn't mean we are.
Well, I think you could also see it from I've been going to your I went to my first show that I saw of yours was, I don't know, I think I was like 17 or 18. And I just remember this guy standing on stage, like with this feathered boa and like really just like flaunting it. And right. You can't, like that felt so unusual to me. I was like, wow, I've never seen that before. But I agree with you. I think it's like you don't generally ask for too much. Even saying, when I did Donkey Head, I think saying I wanted to direct it as well as act in it was sort of a really shocking thing to some people. They're like, well, you can't really do both. Like that's you're taking up too much space, otherwise. And it wasn't to take up space. It was simply just the logistics of how it worked out. But yeah, it's funny.
I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but you bring up a point that I'd actually written down, and I was getting that feeling like, oh, I might not be able to ask you, but you've just brought it up again, and I wanted to ask you about this dynamic of acting and directing, because I know there's artistic ego with actors, as there is with musicians. There is a lot of want, because when you're going to put yourself out there and you're going to pretend to be somebody else, like, it's a risk every time that you put yourself out in a way to be believable on the screen. It means that you risk embarrassment. You risk very simple human things. And within the context and the sort of the power, the political structure, when you are the star and directing and you have co-actors, and to be honest with you, your co-actors, your siblings in the movie, they're on camera quite a bit. So I guess I'm just trying to understand what the dynamic is when you have to play those two roles. And you have to kind of get on side with actors in that way, where you understand the freedom and space and safety they require in order to move into that risk zone. And then you're having to get somebody who's getting the shots you need. Like, it's just a lot, as well as balancing the politics of all that. How was that weird? Am I perceiving a potential problem that was never there, or can you speak to that?
I think it could be a problem. Yeah, I think it could be, but I think going into it, I was really sensitive to the fact that it could be weird, and so I spoke to it at the beginning, I was like, listen, like, would you have an issue with the fact that I'm also going to be writing, or I'm also going to be directing and acting? Is that, you know, that this is going to probably change sort of what you're used to in terms of the dynamics on set. And every person that was there was like, no, I think it'll be, I think it'll be fine. I'm like, you have to tell me what it is that you need. And I want to make sure that you have it, and that you feel safe and that you feel comfortable. And then we also did rehearsals as well, which I think was really helpful, because usually, you know, you don't have time to rehearse anything when you're making film, because there's no budget for it. But they were so open to just sort of having that. And then that also helped set the stage. And then on the day, you know, I think because I had worked with a coach, an acting coach prior, that I felt like I knew what I needed to do as Mona, so that on the day, I just really needed to wear my director's hat. And because I've been acting for so long, I felt like my muscle as an actor was strong, that I was able to sort of put it aside and then just like be there for the cast and the crew as a director. And then when we were, you know, between action and cut, I could do my thing, you know, maybe watch a take just to see that we got what we needed. But otherwise, I felt like I spent probably 70% of the time as a director on set, and then 30% as the actor. And so that kind of gave, you know, just a little bit of like just a place and a space for the other actors and the rest of the crew to feel like, oh, they're taken care of, and that they know that there's somebody sort of like in charge of the ship.
This is all amazing. You brought up one other thing that let's just finish here. Sorry, Agam. I was getting lost in what you're saying here, but we'll wrap it up with the fact that I loved seeing Regina in Donkey Head, and I know that wasn't your first choice, right? You were trying to make the film in Calgary at first. Is that right?
Yeah.
Regina films quite well. There's a lot of space in that city. You could feel the cold. Let's just talk real quick about. I also like Regina, and have been there a lot of times, and so was thrilled to see Trifon Pizza and all the other spots that, you know, if you're visiting there a lot, it was lovely to see them. And I thought that as a big blue sky and a cold place, Regina is a sort of a quiet co-star in this movie in a very lovely way. Were you glad in the end about how Regina shows up in this movie?
Yeah, it was one of those perfect little haphazard choices. It was just, we shot there because of budget. And then I decided to change the location in the film to be Regina. And it worked out so perfectly, because Regina is a city that never really grows. You know, people are born there and then they leave. And, you know, so it just sort of stays the same. And I think what I love about it is that, like, you know, the ugliness about it, but the ugliness kind of makes it beautiful. And I think it was really interesting, because when we first started to scout places, the desire, you know, I was being shown like a lot of really pretty parks, and I was like, no, I want to see the buildings. I want to see the factories. And I think that's something that, you know, we don't always get to see in Canada. Canada is known to be this like it's such a stunning country, but like, where's the old stuff? I think that's really interesting to me. And there is a lot of history. It feels like it's a city of ghosts. Like there's a lot of like sort of, you know, history in that city. There's a lot of new immigrants, and yet it has this, you know, this other side of it that's like very cowboy, and all of that. And when you also say, like, to a Canadian, any Canadian, 4 p.m. on, you know, January 7th, there is a very specific kind of light that we all know, you know, and I wanted to capture that, and like the cold, the minus 40, like all of it. I just fell in love with the city. I've also been there a few times, and the people are salt of the earth people, you know, like it's just, I have nothing but good things to say about that city. And I'm really appreciative. My DOP was so amazing, Leo. He was so amazing at being able to just sort of capture that light and just sort of the way it feels during that time of the year.
One of the most beautifully lit shots is the one where I feel like everybody's around the father. He may have just died. It's beautifully lit. Was there an outdoor light? Like, how did you get that? Is that how that worked?
So, yeah, like I told Leo how I wanted it to feel, and that I wanted there to be some kind of light coming in to sort of feel like somewhat heavenly, but not not like, hit yourself on the head kind of thing. And so he lit it so that he knew exactly. It was so interesting. He would go to the set of the house every single day and try to time out exactly when the sun hits at a certain time. But then he also added an extra light that would, filter into the window. And then he added a little bit of atmosphere, like a little bit of mist, so that when we opened the door and we were ready to shoot that scene, it was all a little bit misty, and it felt a little like something there.
Yeah, you can feel it. It's the warmest shot of the film. I feel like it gives you a feeling of, it's a warm, fuzzy shot, and a warm, fuzzy scene was quite beautiful. Well, Agam, I'm really pleased to talk with you. I should leave you be. Thank you very, very much for chatting. What should we all be watching for now? I know you have the show on CTV. Can you remind us what it's called again?
Yeah, it's called Sight Unseen. It's on Monday nights at 10 o'clock.
And what else is going on with you?
I'm writing. I'm just sort of like nesting right now and writing, and just digging up some more ideas. So that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Well, good luck in Los Angeles. I will keep my sort of subtle envy. I'd be interested to hear how it all goes. I don't know if you have a sort of an end date for departure, or if you're just if you're there in sort of indefinitely for now.
I told my husband, I'm like, okay, we're going to be here for 10 years and then we'll move to like Barcelona. So I don't know. We're just here. We're here, but I work a lot in Canada. So we'll see what happens. Yeah. Thank you so much for this. This has been such an honor talking to you. And it's
my pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for your film, and good luck with all future endeavors. We'll see you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
The Stumble Forward is an Isadora Media production and is hosted by Hawksley Workman and produced by Jennifer Kavanaugh. Be sure to subscribe and follow The Stumble Forward. You can support the podcast at patreon.com/Hawksley Workman. Thank you for listening.
Stumble forward, the stumble forward.